in, but welcome to the webinar. My name is Jennifer Wright. I'm the Executive Director with the Canadian Agriculture Human Resource Council, and with me today is Dave Barrett and Kevin Elder, who will be our panelists in a few moments. This is the fourth in a series of 5 webinars focused on some information and issues that we've been looking at through our National Workforce Strategic Plan. Today, we'll be focused on building a solid foundation, infrastructure, and workforce attraction and retention. Before we delve too far into our conversation, I do want to take the time to acknowledge that Canada is home to more than 600 First Nations who've governed these lands since the beginning of time. The Canadian Agriculture Human Resource Council gratefully acknowledges that we work throughout the lands of these First Nations and that our office is located on the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation. For those of you that aren't aware of CAHRC, or the Canadian Agriculture Human Resource Council, we are a national nonprofit organization. We work with the agriculture industry across Canada to look at things related to workforce, and that includes things like labor market research, skills development, skills analysis, as well as providing support for HR best practices and HR training for employers. Everything we do is industry-led, and we are the Center for Research on Agriculture Labor Market Information. Our vision is really to ensure that the agriculture industry has a qualified, accessible, and motivated workforce to really, meet our economic economic opportunities, and that mission is to ensure that what we're developing is industry-led solutions and that it supports the workforce development and HR management needs of the sector. And with that mandate, we are the primary center for reliable agriculture research, including labor market information, and we are the access point for customizable solutions related to the workforce development and HR management as well. As I mentioned earlier, our panelists today are Dave Barrett and Kevin Elder. Each will have an opportunity to provide a brief introduction of themselves before we jump right into some of our conversation today. The work that we're talking about today is really framed around an initiative that that CAHRC, in partnership with the Canadian Federation of Agriculture and Food and Beverage Canada, have been leading for about 4 years now. As we know, there's been quite a challenge in workforce shortages in pretty much every industry in Canada, but specifically in agriculture and food and beverage manufacturing. And this initiative really brings the industry stakeholders together across Canada to look at how we can provide solutions and move forward in a way that we ensure we have that workforce that we need now and into the future. And so through this, over 100 industry representatives have come together to really frame what could be a very challenging and otherwise, daunting issue into a way that we can really work together and break it down into manageable pieces so that we can be very action-oriented and make progress. So you'll see that the strategic plan is really focused on 5 key pillars: automation and technology, immigration and foreign workers, skill development, perception and awareness of the industry, and workplace people and workplace culture. All of these have some overlying themes that include equity, diversity, and inclusion, data, Indigenous reconciliation and engagement, competitiveness and profitability of the sectors, and of course, infrastructure, which is what we'll be focusing our conversation on today. As part of our first phase of this work, we did take some time to do some research in some key areas, including the perceptions of the industry, the impact of digitalization, automation, and skills on the industry, and the jobs that we have, workplace culture, and things like that. We also really spent some time focusing in on the infrastructure that's needed to ensure that employers and the industries have the workforce that they need to support the economic prosperity of each of the employers across the industries. When we first started talking about infrastructure, there was a lot of conversation around how does infrastructure really tie into the workforce? We often think of our workforce as being very related to just one employer. And as an employer, we often think of our own workforce without looking outside of how our workforces engage with the community they live in, what they need from a point of view of housing and transportation and things like that to make them want to live in the area where the employment is. We also know that across Canada, where people live has really changed. And I think we're over 90% of Canadians are now living in in urban or suburban areas. And so when we look at agriculture specifically, and to a great degree, food and beverage manufacturing, we're looking at ways to ensure that we have the population in the areas where the work is to support the work as well. And so through this research that we did, there were some real key areas that came forward as far as infrastructure needs to support that workforce. Things like transportation. How are your workers getting to work? Not everyone has a car. Is there public transportation or options available? School transportation for families, good roads for commuting, and easy access to other communities. Things like housing. Is there affordable housing available in your area, either to purchase or to rent? What are the rental options available for maybe not only your employee, but for their family as well? From a social perspective, we're always looking at things like, is there daycare available? Are there schools available for your employees' families? What's the access to medical care like? Depending on, food access and variety of food available within your area, and cultural resources, everything from, places to worship from a religious standpoint to social connection and opportunities as well. And of course, we talk lots about connectivity. That availability of high-speed broadband connection, not only for employers to be able to adopt and move forward in bringing more technology and digitalization into their operations, but also from a family perspective. So if your employees are not at work and they have family members as well, you want to make sure they're going to want to make sure that they have access to that high speed connectivity as well for all the things that we all like to enjoy, like our streaming services and FaceTiming and connecting with others and all that type of thing. So these are the things that really our research focused on in relation to infrastructure and the workforce, and really with that thought that when these things are there, we build strong communities, we build strong workforces, and we end up with prosperity. Some of the recommendations that came from this research, and we'll kind of talk on some of these themes as we get into our panelists. There is some investment happening now around infrastructure. Certainly, we're hearing it more and more as something that needs to be addressed across Canada, and that investment's coming from federal and provincial governments as well. But really making sure that there's specific and intentional investment when it comes to rural and smaller community funding. Making sure also that these rural municipalities have some control over their infrastructure programs, because they know what is needed in their areas and they know what is needed to, build upon to ensure that they have the workforce they need to support the economy in their area. We also know that agriculture businesses and food and beverage manufacturing businesses are spread across the country, and their operations do differ, but there's some pretty common infrastructure needs that go across the board so that they can support themselves and their workers. And, even with these differences, there is still a strong need for skilled workers who have their infrastructure needs met for each of these employers across the value chain. Also, we know that meeting that infrastructure need of workers will also build strong communities. It will build economic prosperity, and it will help attract future workers to the areas as well. And that building more affordable housing can really have a positive impact on it, making it easier for workers to settle in a community and to look at job opportunities in those areas as well. And lastly, a few more recommendations around, the availability of transportation options and thinking about, sometimes maybe having to think outside the box, especially in rural areas, about how that transportation is provided. Making sure that those utilities and energy connections are there, not only from internet connectivity point of view, but that the energy levels and connectivity is there as well, that there's options for affordable energy in the areas, and that connectivity side of things really helps support that training, new opportunities, upskilling, and the opportunity for businesses to adopt new technology and digitalization as it becomes available. And of course, on the social side, we know that having accessible social infrastructure makes it easier for your workers and employees to join your community and really want to stay there and build a life around the community in which they're working. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a few minutes, and we're going to jump into our panelists. So that we can hear directly on some examples of what's happening across Canada. Dave, I'll turn it over to you first to introduce yourself and maybe kind of talk a little bit about the area that you're coming from. Dave works in the region of Huron-Perth counties, and he'll provide a little bit more context of kind of what he's seen in his region as well. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you. So I work for Employment Services Bruce Gray Huron-Perth, which is a municipally run service system manager that's part of the transformation of Employment Ontario in the province of Ontario. Excuse me. My region basically is coastal. So if you start along the Lake Huron shoreline in Ontario, go right up to the top of the peninsula where Tobermory is, come down and around. That's Bruce and Huron, Bruce and Gray counties. And then we also go down into Perth and Stratford. Our region is completely rural. We have two cities, the city of Owen Sound and the city of Stratford. Everything else is town, villages, hamlets, and countryside. The size of our municipality, of our four counties, Gray Bruce is larger than the province of PEI with a fraction of the population, and our entire area, Bruce Gray, Huron, and Perth, is the size of the state of Connecticut with 10% of the population. So everything you just talked about are all the issues that we're dealing with. We've been dealing with them our whole lives. So a big part of what my role is employer activation and working with our community partners, our employers, our sectors to figure out creative ways to alleviate these things. They're never going to go away. We know that because they've been talked about my entire life, but we can do things to mitigate them and do our best to support our job seekers, our employers, our newcomers to our region for employment.
Great, thanks, Dave. And I think your perspective is going to be really fantastic in taking, what could be perceived as just research and a report into what this means on a day-to-day in a region that could be mirrored anywhere across Canada, I would say. Kevin, you're on the food processing side of things, representing Food Processing Skills Canada. You talk to a lot of food manufacturers across Canada, and you've seen some different examples in communities as well. I would love for you to first off introduce yourself, but then also share some of your perspective from some of the challenges food manufacturers are facing.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. I echo what Dave said. I think you did an excellent overview of of the various aspects of infrastructure. I'm at Food Processing Skills Canada. I lead our labor market research team. And if you're not familiar with FPSC, we're CAHRC in the next step of the value chain. We do a lot of the similar work, but focused on food and beverage manufacturing. And there are a number of examples that we've seen for different ways that communities have faced some of the challenges that you just outlined. One of the easiest to find out is that in our sector, there's a lot of immigrants and that are working in the sector. And quite often when people are coming to Canada, getting a Canadian driver's license isn't something that they have when they're looking for work. And so one of the best examples was an employer realized this. They were located about 45 minutes outside of the major urban center. And so they hired a school bus to bring in the immigrants that they'd recruited to the facility. And they discovered as well that it was improving their efficiency because everyone was arriving on time. They were meeting at the bus and coming in together. The only hiccup that they had was they'd never done any analysis of their domestic workforce to realize how many of them were making that same journey by car. And so they ran a second bus for everybody else that was coming in the same journey. And then the extra spin-off on that was when I was speaking with them about it, they hadn't looked at any of the carbon reduction that they'd done by taking about 30 cars driving an hour and a half every day off the road. And so there's a lot of benefits and ways that you can find to address the challenges both individually as an employer, but there's other examples as well where food manufacturers have got together with other industries located in the same area that are also doing shift work to contact the municipalities to say, these are our start times. We'd love for you to run a bus, extend this route, or have buses available at these times, because that's when our workers are starting and ending their shifts and would be able to take public transit to really increase access to their facilities and help get workers there. So I think those are some of the aspects of transportation where I've seen people find successful solutions to getting people to their facilities.
Thanks, Kevin. And I think that brings a really good point. As I was saying a little bit at the beginning, we often think of it, if you're an employer, you're trying to work with and manage just your employee base. I think now we're coming to a point where we do have to look outside of just our own employees and what that community looks like, and how we can work together with other employers in the area, how we can partner together to ensure that those out of the box solutions like you've just suggested are put in place and they benefit more than just one employer as well. And it helps mitigate the cost if it's, a group of employers also that are part of that process. It's not just all on one employer's shoulders. Dave, I know you and I talked yesterday a little bit about different options and different things that you're looking at, and some of the challenges from a transportation point of view in your area. You did point out that you're a very rural area as well. So maybe you can just talk a little bit about some of the things you're seeing from a transportation point of view.
So exactly what Kevin talked about, we see it the same here. Is we have employers who are distance away. We have skilled people. How do we get them there? All of my board of directors, for lack of a better way of saying it, are the 4 counties. So they are all trying to figure this out as well. Again, it's a distance issue. So some of the creative things that we've been doing is we champion buying some of our job seekers bicycles. So one of the issues that Kevin talked about is we have one big employer and they run a bus there. If we can put more people on it, it's the final mile. How do we get them to those other employers? We do have 2 small transit systems. City of Owen Sound is a city, but to me, it's a giant small town. And some of those buses end when shifts end. And there have been conversations, but it's the economics every single time it comes to that. So then bikes and e-bikes were something that our funders of the province kind of frowned upon. But when we made the business case of how this is working, we started to see successes. So things like that. The county that I'm in right now, Bruce County, has created a ride share within the county system to try and help people. We're looking at bicycles. We're looking at any way that we can. Something that has been talked about a lot, and I kind of alluded to that yesterday, is we have one of the best transportation systems going every day in our county, right by most farms, manufacturers, employers in our school bus system, but we're not allowed to put job seekers on them. And I see students riding the Toronto Transit TTC. I see them in other towns riding the buses, the city buses and things like that. And it's just one of those ones where I see 3 go by right by my farm that are half full that possibly we could do. That's going to take a lot of political will for something like that to change. But it's one of those options that as our workforce grows and our employer opportunities grow, it's got to be something that we need to consider.
Yeah, and I think we talked about that yesterday. I think it's a great example of thinking outside the box, thinking within the system that already exists. And from an economic investment point of view, it's pretty minimal because, typically rural populations are a little less than they used to be as well. The school buses aren't always overflowing anymore either. So, there's options like that that I think are great examples of things to be considered for sure. I know there's been some smaller communities as well looking at changing their and some have made the move to changing their public transit to be on demand or where you can kind of order the bus or let the bus know when you're coming. I don't know if that's something that either of you have seen in relation to workforce support or within your areas or anything that's been talked about, Dave, for example, in your region.
In our region, we do have a disability transportation system that is owned and operated by lower tier municipalities. So they're the ones that buy into it and fund it, and it's on demand. But again, it's expanding that to other workers who could also get to work and use those services. So a lot of those are for to work, to specialized programs, to employment, to health services, those types of things. And that's one example that covers a lot of Gray and Bruce. And it's locally owned by not the counties, but the lower tier municipalities.
Interesting. Kevin, do you know of anything related to food and beverage manufacturing?
I hadn't heard about the on-demand bus, but I think that's a case for advocating with your regional municipality or municipality wherever you're located to make sure that the services that do exist, try to find a way if it can work for you. Where I have seen that sort of advocacy was with employers where they had parents that were working for them and the daycares weren't opening before their shift times. And so they basically set up meetings with all the daycares in the area and found ones that they could partner with that would open so that their workers could drop their kids off on their way to work and pick them up after work and change their operating hours so that they'd be able to work with the shift times of the employer and make sure then that childcare was covered. So they didn't have people that weren't able to work for them because they couldn't find childcare at 6:30 in the morning. Like those sorts of challenges can be overcome, but you just need to make sure you're identifying the barriers, whether that's access to transit to get to the facility or access to childcare, and saying, what can we do to change this to make it work, and finding what's possible.
And that's a great point, because that's one of the successes I've seen in our area is that parent shift where the employer has said, you can be at home, put your kids on the bus or get them to school, and then your shift starts and you leave before so that you can greet your kids when they get off the bus or pick them up at school. And they've just incorporated shorter breaks, but productivity, and they're full. So the employees are grateful that they can still be part of their children's lives, have a good job that pays well, and meet all of their needs. And it's that kind of creativity that I've seen a few employers embrace, and from what I understand, have been very successful with them.
Yeah, and from that social network point of view, a few things come to mind. First off, when you're attracting an employee to work for you, most families these days are dual income families, and so even if your employee you don't see an immediate need, they're having daycare flexibility in the community is very key to supporting the entire workforce, and having that creativity and openness to think outside the box a little bit to how you can accommodate that, I think is key. I know in agriculture, sometimes, depending on the season and that type of thing, it becomes a bit of a challenge. But I have seen and heard of lots of examples that are starting to come to the forefront now. I know there's an egg farmer in Eastern Ontario that has really been having good success at hiring, parents that they're accommodating their shifts around the work or their children's school as well. And, in the past, you might not have thought that was possible. And now that it's happening, that retention of the workforce and the work that's happening, the productivity, the reduced cost and turnover of staff and all that kind of thing, it's really become a benefit and a good example of again, thinking outside the box. you know, and a lot of the research that we did talks about things like daycare deserts and things like that. And so building that infrastructure up and having that support for families of employees can be hard. And but I think we've just talked about a couple of really good ways to look at it a bit differently, and again to work at it from a community perspective as well. You know, housing obviously is a big issue, really across Canada right now in all industries and certainly in suburban and rural areas as well. And would be curious to hear from both of you some of the things you're seeing on a housing front, both from some of the challenges, but maybe some good examples of at least attempts to try and help with some of the housing availability and affordability.
Well, I can jump in on that one. Yeah, it's a major issue across the country. But one of the things I found is that everyone's knowledge of the housing market is very regional and specific. And so certainly when you're trying to attract people to your place of business, wherever you are in the country, you're only thinking about what you know about your own housing market. But if I were to say to Dave or Jennifer, like, what's the housing market like in Moose Jaw right now? Like, would you have any concept of what rent was or what a house goes for? And so you need to tell people what your situation is, because like I'll use the example from a few years ago. I had a cousin in Vancouver that moved to Ottawa, and she was raving about how affordable Ottawa was, which definitely wasn't the sense in for people in Ottawa, but she'd sold an apartment in Vancouver and bought a house in Ottawa and had money left over. And so it was a very different reality. And so you need to understand where your community fits in the housing reality. And there's some communities where I visited where their rental availability has dropped from 3% to 1.5%, but there's major centers like less than a day's drive away that have availability under 1%, and their rent is 2 or 3 times higher. And so you could easily place your job ads there, and your housing situation, which seems tight for you, is actually a lot better than the area where you're recruiting from. And so people won't have that. They'll find it affordable with lots of options. And so trying to make sure you frame that. And in terms of sort of a more direct approach was, I know some of the rural seasonal workers, seasonal employers rather, the seafood industry, that consistently bring people into a small community, realized that there was a major struggle for their workers to find housing. And so they actually bought some apartment blocks that they rent out as short-term rentals or whatever for off season. But during the when they're operating, they just are the housing provider for the staff that they're bringing in from out of province, so that they know that their staff have a place to live. And so that's another option as well in rural areas, is to sort of make sure that you've got your own housing supply for the workers that you need to bring in, and get involved in that direct way.
Yeah, those are really great examples. Dave, I know you and I had a good chat about this yesterday too, about some of these examples that I'd love to hear about, and then also some of the challenges as your population shifts and that availability of housing for different populations within your region, and not all who are always contributing to the workforce.
So I'll start with that. So housing is a big struggle for us. I live in one of the most beautiful parts of the world, in my opinion, and a lot of people agree with me because we have the coasts. So we have a huge tourism region. We've also got a lot of people who retire and move here. We have large employers who pay very, very well that people retire from. So all the way around from Collingwood, which is just on the edge of our east, all the way around to Goderich, Kincardine on our west coast along the Huron, very, very high housing prices. And people who are retiring there, and Kevin made a great point, is someone leaves Toronto and sells their home for $3 million and moves up here and buys a new one for 1.5, loves it. Those of us that are living here aren't making that income and can't afford that. So it drives these prices up. And then the demand for services and workers, and those workers are unable to live in those communities anymore. So they're moving into the smaller communities, and their prices and housing are going up. And then we have major employers that do a lot of big projects. So as the big projects come in, the tourism cottages, cabins, campgrounds all fill up with these workers that have come to the area, get a good look at the area, and also want to buy in and come and live here permanently. So again, all of these things are what we're constantly dealing with. Talking to some of our operators in agriculture, in tourism, in manufacturing that we work with, some of them are doing exactly what Kevin said, is they're buying their own homes so that they can attract people to the jobs that they have from outside the area, or even within the area if it's food, restaurants, those types of things, they're buying facilities or carving out a piece of their own facilities to put housing in there so that their workers can live as they grow and gain income. Then hopefully they can find places to live off-site. But those are some of the creative things that they're doing. But it is a struggle to afford housing. And the other piece on attraction that we've learned over the past couple of decades is it's not a one-person decision, it's a two-person decision. Because quite often the professionals and those people who are skilled that we need for certain roles in food processing, in agriculture, those types of things, have spouses. And those spouses also have careers that if we can't find something for both of them, neither one of them's coming. So these are some of the struggles that we're trying to navigate on the attraction side. Our role within employment services is our mantra basically is we have jobs here without people and we have people without jobs. And we're working with all of our education partners, training people to try and find ways to get our local workforce into these local jobs.
Excellent. Those are really great examples. And, I think maybe we could talk a little bit about opportunities from a policy perspective to support some of these ideas where, employers are buying apartment buildings, they're developing their own staff housing or opportunities for housing for their workforce. In a time where we also know that there's, we're protecting agriculture land and development and that kind of thing. Have you seen good examples or different things tried to help with that densification and increase capacity from a housing standpoint without, urban sprawl and, that kind of thing as well?
Yeah, things have been tried. Some of the ones are I own a trailer, I park it in my laneway, but I'm not allowed to let anybody live in it because that's my home. Where that could be student housing for an employer. There's also policies at municipal level, county levels, provincial levels that prevent some of these things. Sadly, we've seen tented cities in our area as well, where they can't afford to live, but they are able to work. So it's working through these things with our social systems to try and help people get into housing. The cost of housing is huge. And then again, as I described our geography, where do you put it? So where is it going to have maximum impact? Because trying to build it in every single community and hamlet is going to be very, very tough to do. So all of these things are, again, nothing new for rural. We just live it. And then we work together to try and work with our policymakers saying, let us try this and see if it'll work. Let us try that and see if it'll work. We get some pushback and some really good reasons. I have great ideas, doesn't mean they're always right. So they come back, go, oh, I hadn't thought of that. So we're constantly working together. And that's the part I like about my community is they are open to collaborate once they understand the problem. And we talk about what our issues are constantly. And our municipal leaders at the county and municipal level are very, very good. They're just, they have to basically ensure that we're doing the best thing across the board. So we see a lot of progress. It's incremental, but we all work together pretty well from everything I've experienced over my life here.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah,
Kevin, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, just echo what Dave said about municipal involvement. That's really key. And not just for your own municipality, but you've got to tell your story. Because I think for a lot of employers, they go, well, I've posted this job ad. I've got 20 vacancies in my facility. Everybody knows that, but they don't. So you got to tell them, make sure that your municipalities know and that they're also working together and on board, because there was a really neat solution I saw from southwestern Nova Scotia where different communities got together, and there was one community that was trying to decide whether or not they should build an apartment building, but they didn't have any employers in their community. But when they spoke with the other towns and cities in their vicinity, they realized all of those places had jobs and nowhere for those people to live. And so it was about, they built the apartment building, which filled up with the workers from all these other towns, that then they had to make sure they had transport links to those facilities. But I've also seen where there's also, when municipalities not on board, people had tried to build their own apartment blocks to house some workers. And the municipality said, no, that's an eyesore. We don't want it in our town, and denied their building permits. And so quite often you get the province on board or the federal government's on board with supporting some of these initiatives, but the municipality gets left out. And they're usually the ones that around housing are saying where you can build stuff and can't build stuff. So it's, I've seen both positive and negative municipal outcomes, but it's making sure that they're involved and can see the potential for how their municipality can be involved in solving the labor challenges in the region.
Yeah, no, those are all very good points. From a, we talk a lot about infrastructure and like supporting economic development. We often talk about the movement of goods, supplies coming in, your goods getting out to market and all that kind of thing. We certainly have seen some challenges across Canada with that infrastructure, with rail strikes and port closures and things like that. But when we take it down to more of that workforce side of things and looking at rural communities and employers in smaller locations, things like connection to other communities is very important, but also access to connectivity that we talked about a little bit in the intro, that the IT services, the high-speed internet, all that kind of thing. And then also energy, connection to energy. I know my mom and dad just sold our family farm in southwestern Ontario, and for years we only had electricity for our energy source because we were off the gas line. But they did things like put in geothermal and cut the costs of their energy source and things like that. So I'd love to hear kind of what you're seeing happen, Dave, in your region, and then Kevin, maybe some examples from across Canada as well on that side of where it gets down to cost of living. It's not just about your rent or your mortgage. It's also about, accessing unlimited data and having that at a good speed and those utilities that we all depend on.
So on the utility side, again, our region is not unique. It's very rural. So all of our rail disappeared when they got out of the rail. So it was all torn up, leaving two of our ports without access. We are nowhere near if you're not from Ontario, 400 series highway, so 401, 400, you're at least 45 minutes to an hour away just to access one, and that's at the south. Where we are, it's a lot longer to where my farm is. It's a lot longer to get there. So getting things to market is a barrier. Years ago in my economic development days, we worked with the province to sort of get on the plan, and we've put in things like passing lanes on certain major routes, which has really helped some of our major manufacturers in the area. One I think of is Chapman's Ice Cream. They've stayed in our region. They've been stalwarts in our region and really embraced they're going to stay in Grey Bruce and Huron and Perth. And I think that helps their logistics. But a lot of our agricultural products are trucked there live because we don't have rail or anything like this. And it's been studied to death that it just doesn't make economic sense to process here and then take it to the city. It works better the other way. Infrastructure wise, I'm on DSL. Fiber is just starting to really go in my region. I'll be able to see it from my farm, but I won't get it. It's not going to get to me. We're also one of the biggest areas that didn't have natural gas. And that was a project started 15 years ago that is just starting to come to fruition now, that is opening doors for a lot of business and business growth in our area. But again, it's been a long time in coming, and it's always those processes. So our area has been barriered, but again, we're resilient and we look for creative ways to keep going while we're doing it.
Yeah, yeah, great examples. My mom and dad just got Bell 5 right before they moved. They were a little
Yeah.
disappointed.
Yeah.
It was good for resale, but it wasn't so good for them to enjoy.
No, no, I'd love it, but I'm not going to see it.
No, I think the connectivity piece is, and even just on the difference in road infrastructure, like Dave was talking about as well, like there's being a largely rural-based sector, like I'll use an example from New Brunswick, like there's a beautiful divided highway that runs through the inland part of New Brunswick. But if you're in the seafood industry, you're on the coast and you have single lane highways that have
Exactly.
all the population in the region plus all of your product moving. And it's just so much more difficult to get around. And when you look at those pieces, and then on the connectivity side as well, that quite often we hear for food and beverage manufacturing about productivity. We want to increase productivity. Well, there's technology that exists that I've heard people say, I would love to do this, but it takes me, 3 or 4 days to get an electrician to come from the nearest town to fix an electrical problem I have, and it's not specialized. If I do get the connectivity and upgrade to a more advanced piece of technology, how on earth am I going to get a technician here to fix that issue? And looking at the differences and challenges that are there. But then if you do get that high-speed connectivity, there are some virtual reality tech supports that exist, so you can kind of bridge some of those gaps if you make sure those get there. But it needs a lot of policy advocacy, because quite often governments are looking for where they get the most bang for their buck, and that's always urban, suburban centers, because the population density is greater. But at the same time, they're delivering that. We're not getting it in the rural parts of the country to be able to take advantage and really bridge that productivity gap. And part of that as well is education access. Like when you look at where colleges and universities are, certainly in Atlantic Canada, they're more spread out. There are more rural campuses than there are in other parts of the country. Even Southern Ontario has a good coverage. But when you get out onto the prairies, there's not a lot of rural campuses. And so trying to find where you have access to graduates that have the knowledge to be your maintenance people, or to work in your region where you're not having to sell your region or recruit somebody from Vancouver or Toronto to come live in rural Saskatchewan. How are you going to pull those people in? That's just another layer of infrastructure. And I think the best way I try to get employers to think about it is imagine yourself moving to another part of Canada and thinking about all of the considerations you would make if you're trying to decide where to move. If I'm moving from BC to Newfoundland, I want to find out where there's a hospital, where there's education, is there a religious institution that I'm a part of that is in the community? All of these things that you would want to know, your employees want to know. And so you need to make sure that you understand all of those pieces and how they play together, so that you can one, articulate what needs to change to get those into your community if they're not there, but also so that you can help employees to say, oh yeah, the nearest hockey rink is 20 minutes down the road, and there's a bus that goes there. Whatever aspects of life you're trying to, that are important, like as an employer, that wasn't on a lot of people's purviews. But I think today with the labor shortage, it needs to be. You need to be looking at the entire life that your employees are leading, and have the answers to their questions.
And you hit on one of the things that we, again, everything you just said is what's reality in my region. Is we have sub campuses of 2 colleges in our region. So we have a sub campus in Owen Sound of Georgian College, and we have a sub campus of Conestoga in Stratford. So those are 2 colleges. Youth out migration is huge, because any post-secondary that beyond those 2 campuses go there. We have Fanshawe College has sites throughout Huron and Bruce County. And this is where the partnership comes in, is we work closely with all of these colleges to create local programs for our local economy. So when we work together with them, I've got a data guru who works with me. She's my supervisor, but Ellen's perfect life is 4 screens and spreadsheets, and she can come up with beautiful data that tells us exactly what we need, and we share that with our colleges so they create the program so that we can start trying to get our local youth into them. We've really focused on apprenticeship locally because that's one where if we can get them trained, registered locally, working locally, and then they go to the colleges for their trade school and they stay locally, we have a chance to retain them. Because if they go off to college or university in another community, it's harder and harder to get them back once they leave. Again, I remember being young and I really enjoyed my time in Hamilton, but I was one of very few who actually came home, where most of my friends still live outside of the area and are now going to retire and move home and drive up my housing prices even more. So, you know, these are sort of the rural realities, but our again, it's the partnerships with our counties, our municipalities, our educational institutions that we have going, how can we work together to make this good for our area? And that workforce attraction is a big piece of it. And the one thing I will say that I've seen, and it's more anecdotal, but if you have rural experience and you move to our area, you're probably going to stick. If you don't have rural experience and come to our area, it gets a lot dicier because they're used to restaurants being open till 1 a.m. every night. They're used to Starbucks on every corner is the joke, those types of things. That just doesn't exist here. So those are the types of things where if you have a rural experience and it's a beautiful time to come now, wait till winter. That's a whole other story for people who don't have that rural experience. Local people will say, oh, the road's closed, I'll just take the beeline and get to work that way. Where someone from outside the area going, I can't move, I don't know where to go. So it's these types of things that culturally we have to be more embracing of people from the city and guide them more, and newcomers especially.
Yeah, I'd add to that that's a really key part on making sure people understand the opportunity, like what rural life is like. It isn't for everyone, but if they understand what it's like and how they can see themselves there and really look at people. I remember speaking with employers in Newfoundland, and they all said they went moose hunting on the weekend. And I said, well, did you invite the guy that you just hired from Thailand? And they're like, no. But it's like trying to say you've got to involve everyone in the life of the community so they know how it works. And then the other piece as well about youth out migration is really key because looking at the educational programs, there's entire provinces that don't offer some programs, and people will go out of province to take that program when they're working for an employer as a upskilling, but the program's co-op and they get hired on by somebody in the other province and they never come back. So ensuring that even you can have some of these trainings where you're not going to send people to other regions and lose them is vital.
And you hit right on again these partnerships. So our local school boards in Ontario, we have what are called specialist high skills majors. I believe they're called other things in other provinces, but it's a chance for local youth to focus in certain areas. So we have food processing, we have agriculture, we have automotive, electrical, those types of things. And there's multiple agriculture programs that feed right into, in our area, University of Guelph and Ridgetown College, but are also local colleges. So Georgian College is now dipping its toe into agriculture to help us train local youth. So again, it's those partnerships, and you're absolutely right, is how do we expose them to it? And then when they make the choice, how do we retain them and train them locally so that they stay locally and become part of our local workforce?
Yes, I was something else I was going to say as well, that part of it, when I'm talking to groups of students, especially urban-based students, I let them know, like, yeah, there's a lot of jobs in urban areas, but if you go work in a rural area as a student and get your work experience, quite often they're smaller employers. You're going to get far more experience doing more varied tasks. And so if you're going each summer to work in a rural area while your friends are staying, I'll use the Hamilton example, in Hamilton and working there in a larger company, you're going to come back after graduation And if you choose to stay in Hamilton, then you'll likely be the boss of your old colleagues because you've got so much more experience with doing that. So really trying to open people's eyes to the opportunity that you're going to get, one, to see another part of the country, which is really valuable as well, but also to just gain more experience by taking on more responsibly working for a smaller employer.
Yeah,
And that
no,
smaller employer can show you the breadth of agriculture far more than one that's really focused in an area. Great point. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of our conversation has really highlighted the necessity to collaborate, to partner with your community, to work with all of the different stakeholders, whether it be educators, your municipal, provincial governments, all levels of education, and your neighbors that are employing maybe the same, maybe different employees, but you're all helping each other by supporting and connecting in and partnering, because you're attracting a workforce that can have not only support your place of business, but support the whole community as well, which is really kind of what that infrastructure focus for us has been. And I think we're seeing some good examples of that starting to happen. We just have a few minutes left. If anyone has any questions, you can put them in the Q&A box. And we can make sure that our two experts here have a chance to respond. Let's see if anyone's the Q&A box is just at the bottom of your screen, probably. You can also put them in the chat if that's easier. So this is a great question. Can the transportation model be replicated in urban areas? And that's a really good point that came from Frederick. I think we often focus, because our organization's focus is mostly rural employment. But I know, Kevin, you and I have talked about this quite a bit as well, where from an employment point of view, it's not always rural employment. And from an urban point of view, just because you are employing people in an urban center does not mean that they have close proximity or affordability to your place of employment. And so if it's taking someone 2 hours on public transportation to get from the place they can afford to live to your place of employment, there's a challenge there on the attraction and retention side as well. So I'd love to hear kind of both your responses on that urban transportation question as well.
Yeah, certainly the first thing is, if there isn't transportation to your facility already, talk to your municipality about what your needs are and how many people you're moving in and out. And also your neighbors. Like I mentioned before, like that example was from Brampton, where there was a lot of different food manufacturers, and they've been advocating for years to get a bus route to their facilities, and the city built one when Amazon opened up, and it stopped right in front of Amazon. And it took them another number of years of advocacy to get it to go the further kilometer past Amazon. But it's trying to figure out what those solutions are, because quite often food manufacturers end up getting pushed out of urban centers, because even if they were on the outskirts, 80 years ago when the facility opened, now they're surrounded by houses and they get pushed to the outskirts, when quite often when transit isn't reaching those areas. And so whether it's looking at some of the rural solution I mentioned, where they were running their own school buses to take people there, you can do that from the end of the train line and find a way to get it to go where you're going, or carpool. I know that there was a fruit company in the Niagara region that they just had little shuttle buses that they ran from the town to their farm, and they just kept doing picking up as many people as they could in a loop to get everybody to their facility. And so it's trying to find a way to make it work in municipalities where they have that infrastructure, and they're trying to make sure that they can reach all of the areas. Certainly look at that, but also make use of the data that you have as an employer. Where all your staff live, so you can look at the transit planner and figure out, if I were to take a bus from where this guy lives to my facility, how long would it take me? and you can figure out where your employees are coming from, so that if you're based in Brampton and you've got a bunch of your staff living in Oshawa, like that's going to be a challenge to retain them because they're going to be spending hours on transit every day getting to and from the facility. And so you want to try to figure out how you can make it easier for the people you already have to get to your facility, but also maybe you're an employer in Oshawa and you're like, oh, these guys are going to Brampton. How can I get them to stay in Oshawa? And frame it that way. So there's options, but you need to understand what you're working with and where your people are leaving. In the Lower Mainland in BC, I know that there were facilities that used to be based in Richmond because that was an industrial part of Vancouver for a long time. But then the neighborhood got gentrified, the prices went up. There, as Dave mentioned, the workers couldn't afford to live there anymore, and they were all moving east to Abbotsford and Langley. And so the facilities ended up closing in Richmond and reopening near where their workforce was because they were able to capitalize on the land value for where they were selling, but also then to make sure that they were able to continue operating by locating closer to where the workforce was.
And that's a great point. Is these are business people, so the killer phrase is that's the way we've always done it, and our local municipalities will listen. So if you come and make the business case, and 3P partnerships have worked very, very well, where the business owners say we can kick in this much if you buy the bus and provide the insurance. How can we make this work? And they're open to those types of things. But it's exactly what you said, Kevin, is you have to look at your own workforce. Where are they coming from? How are they getting there? Is there a better way so I can recruit more? And it's getting that on paper and bringing in your partners to say, this will work. Municipality, please help us. And I've seen it work several times, particularly in our tourism area, where their buses go to a certain point and the local businesses in another area said, listen, we need it to come this far. We can kick in this much money, and the bus got extended. So it's figuring those things out, but don't just let it sit and assume everybody knows. You have to make the business case and advocate. And in my area, I find our municipalities are wide open to it if the business case is sound.
I think those are really good comments and things that we have, we can also frame in a way that not only supports your the reason for investment from a municipality point of view, where you have less cars on the road, there's less wear and tear on the road, there's less emissions, but also when you're attracting that workforce in, and certainly our younger workforce is really keen on environmental options and reducing that kind of thing as well. So you can provide an environmentally friendly solution as well. And I know there's a good comment here from Joel in our chat as well about not only is it about bringing people in, but there's a lot more people under the age of 25 not even getting their license. So you think you have a young employee base, it doesn't mean that they have access to a car or that they're willing to get their license and move forward as well. So so this has been a really great conversation. I've really appreciated the insights and the thoughts that you have both shared. I think we've had a very engaged group as well. And, we've really, I think, brought to light some of the thoughts around how infrastructure really does play a key role in attracting and retaining your workforce. And it's not a simple solution, but we do need to be looking at outside the box at new ideas and really working together in a collaborative way in all of our regions to ensure we have that workforce supported. As I mentioned at the outset, this is number 4 of 5 webinars for our spring series. We do have another one coming up next week that's going to focus on North American workforce trends and the impacts of tariffs. If you're interested and weren't able to see the last ones, they are available also from our YouTube page, and you can link to those from our website. We also have an event coming up. There's still a few spots available for our Workforce Summit that's happening in Toronto, June 11th and 12th. At this summit, we will be furthering conversations that we've been having through these webinar series and bringing together leaders from across all aspects of agriculture and food and beverage manufacturing to talk about our solutions and actions moving forward to ensure we're increasing productivity, increasing skill development, and working together to have that workforce of the future. So that's it for today. Again, thank you very much, Dave and Kevin, for your inputs. I very much appreciated your thoughts and your contributions, and look forward to continuing these conversations in other areas. And for everyone on the line, you can see this recording shortly and share it with your friends and colleagues as well. So thank you, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Jennifer. That was fun.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you soon.